You're listening to Joe Dalton on Dublin South FM, Crossing the Rubicon.
Folks, it's another week. I keep saying every week that it's a strange week, but I'm not going to say that anymore because I see hope and I see glory coming ahead, especially into 2021. As you probably know, or some of you know, that one of the archbishops came out saying Soros, Bill Gates, the WHO were all connected, and also said that the Pope was a puppet, corruption. And this is going to make a lot of people change their thoughts around the world. We know that crazy stuff is going on in the US and right across the world. But I also believe that there is a great awakening. Snowden said you can blackmail anybody once you dig deep enough into their own life. We in Ireland here fell in love with Bill Clinton because he did help us through the peace process in Ireland. But as time went on, and in my investigation, I discovered that he was just a puppet for Hillary. And the Clintons Foundation, the corruption that they have caused, especially in Haiti, and the damage they have done around the world as well. They are my own personal views. I decided to ask someone to come on who is an investigative journalist. And I'm going to find out more about what's happening in Europe, but not America, because, you know, CNN, the mainstream media in America is corrupt. And I believe over here that it is holding the truth from the citizens. I have Susan Bradford on the line here today, herself to you briefly, and then we can get into a conversation. Hello, Susan.
Yes. Hi, Joe. Yes, I'm Susan Bradford. I've worked as an investigative journalist for over a decade now, and I'm actually a very great Anglophile. I spent my junior year abroad studying at the University of Essex, and also I did my master's at the University of St. Andrews, and my master's at the University of Essex. So,
Susan, when we talk about investigative journalism and we talk about information, you know, some people go, I heard this or I heard that, and where'd you hear it? And you find out they heard it on YouTube or they've heard it through someone else or whatever. You've wrote some amazing books. You've been involved in, when you're doing your investigative journalism, where are you getting your information?
Okay, so when I was doing my postgraduate work at the university, when I was working at the University of Essex as a postgraduate, I was able to get a kind of a deep insights into the European Union. I was working with the European Society, Eurosoc, which allowed me to actually venture into the European governing institutions, the European Commission, European Parliament. I also worked for the Atlantic Council as a senior research fellow. So I was able to kind of get an insider's view towards NATO and globalism. And I founded the European Review, which became the departmental publication for the Center for European Studies. And that allowed me to actually work as a correspondent, go on the Council of Europe, where I covered the copy, talking to the European leaders. And my tact has always been that you want to go to the horse's mouth, go to the people who are actually making policy, finding out why they did it, and back it up with facts. And my most extensive research was with the Abramoff Investigation. I don't know if you remember that one. Basically, that involved one of the most prodigious lobbyists on Capitol Hill was prosecuted for corrupting dozens of our congressmen, the White House agencies, and basically like bilking the Indian tribes. So as I began to investigate, I uncovered that the information coming out against it was entirely false. So the way that I did that is I was able to acquire a copy of the plea agreements, the court cases, and then to actually research each case. Who was behind it? What were the dynamics behind each case? I went into the Indian tribes. I cultivated the tribal leaders and was able to work with them to actually get original documentation from the tribes. In fact, I retrieved thousands of pages of documents. I interviewed government leaders. and lobbyists, attorneys, tribal members, whistleblowers, hundreds of sources to enable me to put together a complete and comprehensive view of what actually had transpired. And what I had uncovered during that time is that the deep state in America had been forged through the back door of the Indian tribes. And that's how the Rothschilds were able to kind of get into our financial institutions and reshape our government. It was through the Indian tribes. So once I had that understanding that was of both the political and the financial networks throughout Indian country and the deep state, everything else became a lot more easy for me to understand. So I would be able to look at an issue like COVID, for example, and I knew exactly, or had a pretty good idea, intuition of where to look. And I researched. I guess I followed my intuition, if you will, and I actually dug up hard, evidence that enabled me to kind of piece together the true story of what was happening.
Before we get into the craziness of COVID, some people will ask the question, what is the deep state? If you can just give us a quick paragraph of what the definition of what the deep state is and what that's got relevant to do with the world.
Okay, so the deep state refers to a group of there are elites who are controlling the world through the shadows, behind the governments. They trace to the City of London through the financial district and to the Rothschilds and the international bankers. So they had forged international intelligence networks through the CIA, MI5, MI6, Mossad, that enabled them to communicate directly with each other and to forge policy. So they were actually working independent of the governments, even though they claimed to work for the government. So they were working behind the scenes to shape policy that would enable them to amass more power and more wealth for themselves. So one of their principal strategies was to enable countries to wage war against each other. Wars create debt. Through debt, they provide financing. And once they acquire or once they're able to get a country indebted to them, then they control the government. So within the United States, the deep state might be, for example, the Carlyle Group, AIG, the insurance company, Booz Allen Hamilton, NSA. So these are different groups that work together. And you're also looking at the leading executives of the multinationals, because these are controlled through interlocking boards of directors that also work together, influence the government to shape policy, for their own self-enrichment.
It's interesting because Ireland would probably be one of the last, we joke in a way, is one of the last states of America because of the connection that we have. An Irishman built the White House. Every second person in America is related. So there is that strong bond. That bond is here. We have the multinationals here. We have Google's head office here. We Facebook's head office here. We have Dropbox, all the big multinationals and all the farmers. And it is wonderful because they have created massive employment in the country as well. What people don't realize that these large companies have control. We used to think of dictators. Dictators were people who ran countries, but now global elite, global multinationals are more powerful than governments because of the money that they make and the control that they have around the world. And these are some of the things that people don't realize, the concern that they have, and then the censorship and all the other pieces of information they have as well. So this is even a big play that goes beyond what people actually are visiting when it comes to lockdown and corona and everything else as well. You try and tell people about the Queen and all the corruption. They go, yeah, that's probably right. But I don't think they realize the implications that it's had for centuries and what it could have in the future as well.
That's a very good point. And to address your first point about the multinationals, one of the the downsides is that they take so much from the country in terms of taxes and revenues. And then on the other hand, they shirk taxes, so they don't pay back into the system. And then they have no loyalty whatsoever to the country that built them. So in the case of America, all of our multinationals that have become very wealthy through our research and development and ingenuity and skills and public funds have relocated over to China, where they're exploiting cheap labor, because ultimately their loyalty is to their shareholders, not to the citizens who provide, or to the countries that gave them their lift. And in terms of the royalty, the royal family did not used to be a negative institution. In fact, the concept of noble refers to a noble person, somebody who has virtue. They're elevated in their thinking. So the original aristocrats who governed England had the divine right to rule, and they were first servants of God who served their people. So you had a different type of dynamic within England. This all changed during the Napoleonic Wars, when the Rothschilds broke the Bank of England and acquired breeding rights into the royal family. So in turn, they were able to kind of intermarry into all the different royal families and elites throughout the world. And so in the process, they transformed them into more of a satanic ethos. And that's where we've had our problems. So currently, the Queen of England, I don't know if she's still in power or not, but she is an illegitimate monarch, to the best of my knowledge. And she's a flat royal monarch who is the daughter of a maid and a Prime Minister Winston Churchill, who was a Rothschild bloodline. You mentioned blackmail I think you might have mentioned blackmail earlier as a way to compromise our leaders, as we've discussed. So since Queen Elizabeth was illegitimate, shadowy powers have been able to blackmail her and to have her take actions that are not in the interests of the British people, but are in the interests of these shadowy powers.
Going back to the multinationals, like if you even looked at Apple over here, the Irish taxpayers are $5 billion in taxes, and the Irish government were kind of going, well, we let them away because they've created so much employment. But they also, and that's sitting in escrow at the moment because there's a debate between the EU and Ireland about paying this. So that's actually sitting in an escrow for Ireland. But also, if you look at the likes of Dell, and if you look at some of the other large multinationals, let's look at Amazon. Amazon, which is a huge, big player, but Amazon also have the cloud computing for the CIA, and they are Dell. There was CIA operatives were working in Dell as part of it. There's probably in CIA operatives working in Google and in Facebook. So these companies grow to a certain level, and then the likes of the CIA or whoever get involved in it, and they're in behind the shadows as well, pulling some strings or controlling for, in the brackets, the greater good.
I don't think the CIA get in it at some point. I think they were there from the very beginning. So the elites are monopolists. They want to control and dominate every market that they are in. If there's a new upstart, they will very quickly either try to take it over and buy it out, or they will shutter it. So the monopolies, again, like these tech companies, are controlled through interlocking boards of directors. Typically, they are deep state operations. So we have our taxpayers fund the research. Typically within the military will then find some type of civilian application for it, and then they will release it through and typically have a figurehead like Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, who will preside over the company and appear to be, to have created this multi-billion-dollar company out of a garage, and somehow that company will have international reach and be worth billions and play this incredible strategic role for the government. The CIA does not work to provide intelligence for the government. It actually works on behalf of the elite. It's peopled by the elite. So it's generally the sons and daughters of like elite corporate heads and bankers who then gather intelligence through networking, which they can then use, on behalf of expanding their own market share.
I always looked at Twitter. Twitter has been going for multiple years. They're $5 billion in debt. They've never made a profit. If that was any other organization, you'd be bankrupt, you'd be gone, you would
Correct.
fizzle out. So how can a company be going for so many years, never make any money, and they are still got these players? Because there's someone pumping money into it, because it matters more to the information that's being shared or the monitoring than the company itself.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. So they're able to see who your networks, what friends you have, and to review your private conversations. And also, as we're seeing now in the current election, they can censor those who they disagree with. So they get the population to look towards Twitter for their information, and then they kind of control the message. And I would say that Tesla's companies are very much the same. They can, Musk companies, for Elon Musk, they continue to go bankrupt. He's had to draw from taxpayer funds. He rarely ever makes a profit, and yet he continues to go from strength to strength to strength. And this is, in my opinion, due to the fact that he's advancing a technocratic agenda, like for the Green New Deal and for space adventures and other kind of tactics that the elites would like to advance. So he is basically their spokesperson, to advance this agenda. But you're absolutely right that they, any other person would not be able to function as they do.
I'd love to have a company that was 500 million in debt and still be able to drive around in a Rolls Royce,
It's a very privileged life.
A very privileged life indeed. Okay, so we know, I'm questioning what's going on in our own country. And one of the things that I've noticed, and I said it to a few people are telling me behind the scenes, this is terrible. I can't believe we're in lockdown. I can't believe this is going on. Because myself and a few other people are speaking out about this. There's other people speaking to me about it, but they're not saying anything publicly. And from the business world, I think they're not doing it because egotistically they're frightened that they might affect their own business and they might say something wrong. So they're all going, this is grand. There's the silent majority, but that silent majority, I believe, is growing and growing and growing. So jumping onto your book, Unmasked, and what's been going on in the world, if people were to pick it up and read it, I think most of them would go insane and actually not be able to figure out that this is the truth. Because even a conspiracy, if you call something a conspiracy theory, which the CIA actually came up with the word, that with what's going on in the world at the moment, and it was a great saying that someone said that that's like calling a firefighter a conspiracist when he goes putting out a fire in a building. Tell us what your thoughts are. Tell us what your investigating journalist has found, and let's share this with the world because they gotta know. They gotta know.
Thank you. First, to address your first point about how people are reluctant to speak out, I think there is strength in numbers, and I think that the state has a way of punishing those people who do buck the system. Like they can shutter the system, they could fine you, you could face social sanction. So I would recommend that people together kind of form their own networks, and I know that London has had a few kind of group meetings, or not group, but group conventions where the people have spoken out against the lockdowns. And I think you need to see more of that because the agenda, if it's actually implemented, is going to be very dangerous and something that you will not be able to recover from. What they are wanting to do is to destroy the economies around the world and reduce the people to like a basic, very minimalistic subsistence level where they are tracked and monitored every minute of the day. Through the Great Reset, they're planning on dispensing with their debt, but at the same time, you would not be able to own anything. So you'd be effectively like a slave in America, in Ireland. But what I discovered is that, yes, so there was in fact a conspiracy. So what I discovered, and this is in my book, Unmasked, the coronavirus story, which is available on Amazon. What I discovered is that about a few years prior to the release of the coronavirus, our states in America were already setting aside funding for it. And that was funding for both the Defense Department, the Armed Forces, and the Departments of Health and Human Services. And that is because both of them would be working together, the Armed Forces to dispense with the vaccines, which would be have a tracking device in them, and the Health and Human Services, which would be providing, the medical aspects of that. And then I discovered that the coronavirus and the vaccine were actually patented. And this was even before it was released. It was patented at the Pirbright Institute of London. And the Pirbright Institute receives funding from the WHO, which is working with Bill Gates, receiving money from Bill Gates. It was also working with the Wellcome Trust, the Medical Research Council, which answers to the Royal Trust, I believe, which in turn answers to the monarch. And the patents that they would have needed to process were done through Serco and Kinetech. Both of those companies are controlled by the Queen through the Golden Share, and they hold a number of patents for like the RDIF chip, FEMA cams, IRS, and they're actually collecting our taxes, and they're processing health insurance through the Affordable Care Act, and tax firmware and so forth. So this was kind of an event that was planned years in advance, and then I saw that at the end of 2019, on the one hand, there was Event 201 in New York, in which Bill Gates was talking very passionately about bodies on the streets and all the economic and financial impact of the coronavirus. Like they were wargaming. And then in Wuhan, China, at the military war games, the virus was actually released. And the military war games brings together both the armed forces and the health and human services from across the country. So this was a global coming together that is convened to celebrate globalism and the end of the World War II. So you can see that this was a celebration. The coronavirus was released there. It was the financing and the technology came from London, and then it was released throughout the world. And then you can see that there was a global coordinated response to it. So I can elaborate further, but that's kind of a general overview.
What is the long-term game? Like I talk to people and go, this is about control. First, what they're doing is they're creating fear, and then they're creating doubt. And, people are argumenting with each other. There are major mental issues going on around the world. I know that the people in charge don't really care about mental issues, and they don't care about suicides, and they don't care about cancer, and they don't care about all the others. It's about control. And they're feeding this in, and they're using the mainstream media and other ways to feed it in, and especially with social media, then with the big censorship that's happened as well. But what is the long-term plan? Okay,
that's a good question. So the long-term agenda, I think, well, first of all, this original coronavirus pandemic was a trial run, and they are slating to have an actual coronavirus that will be released allegedly. This is in their plans. Whether they do it or not is a different story. And I would encourage the public to make sure that their immune system is as strong as possible so that they can survive it. But through the coronavirus, they are planning to institute social distancing. And that way they can ensure that you will work and you can study and do all the other things that you would normally do from home, like shop from home, like through Amazon, for example. That way they can track everybody and institute controls. They are also planning a kind of, as per Agenda 2030, to move people off the land and into these tech gulags. So they'll be confined in smaller spaces that will be automated and controlled. And then in the process, they'll give them universal income. So they'll have like a basic subsistence level of income that, like China, they could take away that income, your privileges, if you hold an opinion they don't want, or if you take any actions that they feel that they think would be unwarranted. So the coronavirus was meant to accomplish a few things. One, was a system of control, and they were hoping to crash the economy as an excuse to provide cover for the economic bubble. That was one aspect. They're also monopolistic, so they want to gather strength and power for their own companies, like Amazon, for example, while the mom and pop stores were forced to close. Another very sobering consequences, one that was planned, is that they wanted to close the churches. They're very intimidated by God and the power of God and faith among the people. They wanted to have an excuse to close the churches. So it's you can now go into like a quickie mark, but you can't go into a church. Like they're changing the context in which people can come together. But ultimately, like they want to have further and further more stringent lockdowns to oppress the people, to seize their assets, and institute tighter controls. It's really to get empower themselves.
I said about a year or 2 years ago that the world in the future, if we didn't get our shit together, would be like Blade Runner.
Or even Hunger Games too.
Hunger Games, but it was Blade Runner. Not everyone was unemployed, everyone getting states, and there was just everything in these cities. Amazon many years ago decided attack the bricks and mortar, and that has been happening at the moment. In Ireland today, if a priest gathers a service of people, he can be fined and arrested if he brings people into a congregation. It is all being shadowed under health. The coronavirus, if you look at the numbers in the coronavirus, their survival rate is up in the 90s. We cannot live a world on counting how many people got a coronavirus and ICU beds. A world can't live on that, but it's the fear, and once you get fear into people, you'll get them to do anything. There has to be a point when people are kind of going, this is enough. Like they're bringing laws into this country at the moment, which is going against what our forefathers fought for. And people
Correct.
are just agreeing to them because they are fearful. There is a small minority marching on the streets, and if you look on Facebook and Twitter, they go, "Oh, terrible! They should be arrested." But if those people were marching for something that other person who was given out believed in, they would then go, "Okay, that's all right." But because of the fear that's been fed in, they're giving it out about these. And if it continues on, none of us will have any rights whatsoever, because governments always have an agenda, and the agenda in a government is for how do we stay in power. It's not for the greater good of the people, but it's how we stay in power. And there's questions being asked, and the governments here are like in America, you're blessed. President Trump will go out and talk, and he'll get questions. Here, there's no question. Here, they basically come out, tell us what's happening. We've got a medical board that is advising the government, who shouldn't be there. So it's deep state. Yeah, it's a word that you said at the beginning of this. It's frightening. I think this is, from a spiritual point of view, I believe this is a great awakening. I think everything that they're doing is making more and more people wake up. I also believe that if Hillary had got into power 4 years ago, we would have went into lockdown in February, the world would never came out of it.
I agree.
They do not, like, if you look at in Nigeria, there are riots for food in Nigeria. If you look at the Philippines is on lockdown, and the people are being given bags of rice and tins of tuna fish to survive on. And the government is talking about putting white sands on the Manila beach to make it look better when the people are starving. Like, the stuff that's happening around the world is completely mad. And we as the people need to kind of go, your game is up, buddy. People power.
I agree with that. I think this plan that they're unfolding now, I think that they're jumping the gun a little bit. I think this is what they had planned for us at the end, but because they realized they were losing power and that they had in fact lost, I think they tried to move ahead, full steam ahead. And I think the plan isn't going very well. It's obvious what they're doing. And ultimately, the government should exist to serve the people, and that's how it used to be. The government they were public servants, and so the moment that ceases to happen, the government becomes illegitimate because it shouldn't exist to serve itself. And I think this is also a test of the mettle and the faith of the people that, that they need to have a great awakening to reclaim their power, their faith in God, and to be able to, assert their own rights. And I think that they can do this confidently because there are very powerful people in high places, and Trump is one of them, who are pushing back against the deep state and are giving the people the opportunity, to assert themselves and to push this agenda back.
Well, let me talk about Trump. I used to think Trump was the biggest idiot in the world, and DNA testing children on the border and finding out that they were not with their parents, the adults that were with them didn't match the DNA, trafficking, peace in the Middle East. If Hillary was in, there would have been a bigger war. If Joe Biden gets back in, we'll all go back into lockdown, and the fight there'll be a different fight on it. I think Trump was deep state. What do I believe changed him? He might have found God and realized there was something bigger and find faith. Our life can change. And I honestly believe there was a turning point for him in that, and he went then against the cabal. And because he had the inside information, he was actually able to, and being a smart man, he was actually able to counterbalance the tactics or the strategy that they had.
I think that's true. He was always a part of the cabal. He was, working in the casino industry and was heavily indebted to the Rothschilds, other international bankers. But from what I understand, and you can also, I cover this in some of my books as well. And you've also seen some signs of this with, I don't know how much Hunter Biden has been covered in your local media in Ireland. But our political establishments sold the country out to China. And if Hillary had been elected, the global currency would have transferred over to the yuan. And China essentially would have been allowed to take over the United States and the rest of the world. So I believe that Trump was recruited by the military who understood the agenda. And this was one that was hatched at the end of World War II, in which they wanted to reduce America, one of the greatest countries in the world, where freedom was protected and cherished. They wanted to transform the United States, a very prosperous nation, into a bankrupt welfare state, and then elevate communist China to the ruler of the world. And that was the Clintons and the Bush dynasties were both integral to that. And I think that, and this is mainly from hearsay on my part, I don't know this from firsthand evidence, that Trump was recruited by the military who knew what would happen if Hillary got into power, and they made sure that once he got into power, he knew what to do. That he was going to take the steps that he needed to help us reclaim our power. And one thing that he's done has been to help us become energy independent. What the Green New Dealers want to do is to they hype environmental alarmism, where human beings are the cancer on Earth, and part of that involves doing away with oil, and then transforming us or transitioning into like wind energy and some of these other green energy technologies that are very unreliable. They're expensive, and they'll actually have us revert back to kind of a more primitive style of living. But Trump made sure that he shored up the energy supply, and now we have very cheap oil. The economy was booming, at least it was before the coronavirus hit. And he was able to take the steps that he needed to have the deep state expose itself, and also to kind of push the agenda back.
It's when you look at all the pieces and the way the jigsaw is fitting in, we seen that he surrounded himself with so many people, and then they were fired, and now the new people came in, and all the other structures as well. And then about with all the different EU leaders, and how he, with the Queen, walking in front of the Queen was a sign that saying, you're out of here. And have they all capitulated?
Correct.
Have they all capitulated? What's the plan? I look at our own country here in the Republic of Ireland, and I'm trying to figure out who is on whose side. Go on.
Oh, yeah, sorry. If you understand that there were arrests that there were arrests at the Vatican, and also that the Queen has retired, if you will. She's no longer in Buckingham Palace and has this. The Queen, the Vatican is where they held their gold. Well, that was where they stored a lot of the wealth, in addition to these different offshore accounts. So if you know that the head of the snake has been chopped off, it's really a matter of time before you kind of clean up house throughout the national governments. And I believe that is being done. I mean, you need a full house cleaning. And I believe that there are also movements within Great Britain and hopefully also Ireland to restore common law. You're going to go back to common law and more of a law-based.
There's something I don't know an awful lot about, and there's a lot of people talking about the world is run on maritime law, and we should go back to common law. And I'm trying to say, how does that affect us because we're a republic, because we're an independent? We fought against Britain and came a republic in the early 1900s. I need to look into this more, because if it's the common law, then we have the rights to be in control. The government go, right, get them arrested. They're making these rules up.
They're so arbitrary.
If these people have invested interests in certain things, they won't let them close. But if they've no interest in them, and it's all about belief systems, my belief system and your belief system is different from someone else, and that person might be in power because they believe what they're doing is right because they've been told. It's about giving those people, everybody, enough information to let them know that there's a proper and there's a bigger play here. Because most people, if this conversation that we're having, Susan, most people will think this is absolutely bonkers. Have you been vilified?
If I have, I haven't. Not to my knowledge, I haven't been vilified. I think if you were to turn off your TV sets and you were to look at the world around you, you would see that nobody is dying of coronavirus. Your reality would be entirely different. And to answer your question, no, I haven't been vilified. In fact, I'm finding that a lot of Americans, at least, share my view, and they are kind of resisting the agenda. And also, to address your point on maritime law, I'm not an expert in maritime law, but the little that I do know about it is that all of our attorneys have to register through the bar, which is the British Accreditation Registry, which is a little odd considering that the American Revolution was allegedly fought for us to separate from Great Britain and its control. But so essentially, all of our attorneys owe their fealty to the Queen of England. So in turn, you have our judges are corrupted, have been corrupt, and our lawyers ultimately have to answer to the Queen and conform to her law. So I think that's another form of the control system, which we need to kind of reform to take back our own power.
I know a lot of people won't want to believe this, but I believe that 2021 now, it's going to be the year of disclosure. I also believe that the next 2 months is going to be crazy, completely crazy. There'll be a lot of people, there'll be treason around in governments around the world, and I think that'll be the biggest awakening for humanity.
It's very sobering to realize that most of these leaders are related to each other. Hitler, Mao, Stalin, Bill Clinton, William Churchill, even the Queen of England, they're all Rothschild bloodlines. So if you can imagine that they placed their own people into positions of power. So if they have been found to be corrupt, you'll see that the entire cabal will fall, because they're all kind of working together, and they're all like totally corrupted. And
yeah, like I find it hard to believe that Bill Clinton is a relation to Churchill. I haven't got my head around that. I'm one of these people, I need to have a swab of the DNA to have a look at the Y chromosome to see it. And, people have said that Merkel was related to Hitler as well. There's all these elements that when you kind of you go, oh, hang on, that's a bit too deep. It's
Oh, I'm sorry. He was allegedly the son of Pamela Harriman and Winston Churchill, and he was sent over to America to fulfill the Atlantic Charter.
And then there was Epstein. Epstein Island and all the people that was on that flight. I think Hollywood is done. Hollywood is finished. Hollywood pedophilia ring is over.
No, I haven't studied Epstein directly, so I haven't researched him. Yeah. He allegedly was working for the Mossad, and compromise is the greatest weapon the elites have against elites. They're either bloodlines or they're people of very weak character that they can compromise, like through drugs, through personal indiscretions. So I think that he fulfilled that role, which was similarly fulfilled by Jimmy Savile on your side here. So they do have these characters who compromise, our leaders.
Yeah, and the one thing about Jimmy Savile as well, which annoys me, was that all this stuff only came out after he died. Why did that not come up? The BBC knew what he was up to for decades, and they said nothing. And only this stuff comes out afterwards. It's all hidden. And
what I was going to say is that the media, of course, they're controlled by corporations, which in turn are, they're multinational, and they generally serve as like the PR arm of the elite. And from what I understand and have read, the BBC was created to hide the fact that the Queen is an illegitimate monarch. So it was created around the time when she was a princess, and then it was used to kind of cloak the royal secrets. So I think that could be in part why the BBC did not divulge Savile's secrets.
Yeah,
I think that was an extension of the role.
We could get into the Rothschilds in the Great Forest of Bavaria and the hunting games, but I don't think our audience is ready for that yet. Yeah. What do you want to share with our audience here in Ireland?
I like to let them know that as harrowing and as distressing as the world they might feel observing the world around them, from what I've uncovered, and I did research quite furiously once I began to become aware of the deep state agenda, I think there is a lot of hope. There is the agenda. It has been derailed and stopped. I know there are still some parts of it that are going on, and I think they will run their course. But it is my hope that not only will you educate yourself, but that you'll educate other people. And, because through education, you will, education is power, knowledge is power. So know that the coronavirus is part of is being used as part of a control system. But once you understand the dynamics behind it, you'll be able to kind of take your power back and begin to exercise that power in proper fashion that will enable you to also take back your communities. And if you'd like to, I always welcome feedback from readers. So you're more than welcome to contact me through my website. Again, I'm happy to give that to you.
Yeah, give us. I think your books on Amazon. Give people the name where they can go to find out more information from you for yourself.
Okay, so I have one book which was Unmasked, the coronavirus story, and that reveals the agenda behind the coronavirus and how it's being implemented. And my book Fleeced, which is spelled FL33C, three Ds, like fleece and technocracy. That reveals how the coronavirus is being used to advance the Green New Deal, and that explains what the Green New Deal is, what the technocracy is, what they're trying to achieve by it. And I also have written a book called The Shadow Dragon, which reveals how our political establishments have sold the world out to communist China. So we're currently facing this, communist China beast that is threatening the world over. This was a creation of our elites, and so I think it's important for us to kind of understand what they've created, how they did it, and why, and then again to be able to reclaim our power and take back our countries.
We'll put your website up in the link as well, that if people want to click on the website, and then they'll follow in. Many other topics that we could get into as well, but I think that there's enough information there today for people to even just go and have a look and go on a journey themselves and see where it takes them. Because if it does, they'll find out that the world is not what they thought it was. And the more and more people that wake up, the more strength that we can have in numbers and take our freedom back.
And remember, here at Dublin South FM, we're interviewing plenty of people around the world, conscious leaders, and that's why we have the Conscious Business Podcast, which is part of the Conscious Business Academy, offering purpose, profit and prosperity in your life through soulful selling, mindful marketing, conscious leadership and creative culture. If you want to reach out to me, it's joedalton.ie. You have an awesome week and take care and look after yourself.
You're listening to Joe Dalton on Dublin South FM, Crossing the Rubicon.